The Steve Gill Show.
Hey, welcome back in. This is the Steve Gill Show. Very special guest in studio today, former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, back out at Stanford at the Hoover Institute, among other things that she's doing, and on a book tour promoting her book, No Higher Honor, a memoir of my years in Washington. And it is a great recap of kind of the inside scoop of what actually goes on. And one of the interesting things I noticed, obviously, the relationships with Cheney and Rumsfeld degraded over time. And I was because I've watched interviews with them. I've read your interviews and theirs. There does seem to be, okay, why did this all get off track? Right. And okay, my theory is that you came in as a young advisor, and that the transition from how they got to know you and when you became an equal is something that you saw, but they didn't. Is that part of what it might have been?
Well, I relate in the book, especially, I think, with Don, who had really been a mentor to me and maybe had a little trouble making the transition. But I think there was something else going on. You know, we were all under a lot of pressure because actually the relationship started out just fine in many ways. And we were all under a lot of pressure. And they always say that when you're under pressure, you become more of who you are. And so whatever personality characteristics there are, whatever edginess there is, it comes more to the fore. And the differences were substantive. They were truly substantive differences. So I would not want people to think that this was at all personal. And indeed, Don and I remain friends. But it was edgy and it was difficult at times.
But it's truly black or white decisions. It's not like, if the family's trying to decide, do we go to Disney World or Disneyland for vacation, going to Missouri isn't the answer. There was no middle ground on a lot of these debates.
That's right. And we were talking about life and death decisions in the wake of 9/11. So they took on a severity that they probably might not have at another time. So I respect my colleagues. I think we did a good job for the country. But yes, at times I wished that we could have had a little bit better comedy among the principals.
So a lot of the book still deals with okay, why did we take out Saddam Hussein? Why go into Iraq? And a lot of the pitch at the time was, seemed to be, did he have anything to do with 9/11? Did he have anything? Even now they're going in hindsight. Did he have anything to do with 9/11? When to me the best pitch you guys did make, it just didn't get captured by the media as much as, it's not about the last one. It's about preventing the next one. And that still seems to get lost in the translation.
I agree. It does get lost in the translation. And that was exactly how we thought about it. We established pretty early on that Saddam was not directly linked to 9/11. What he was linked to, though, was a Middle East that was chaotic, volatile. He was linked to terrorists, not necessarily al-Qaeda, but to terrorists. He had used weapons of mass destruction before. He was still shooting at our aircraft when we were trying to patrol the so-called no-fly zones to keep his forces on the ground. He tried to assassinate George H.W. Bush. He put 400,000 of his people in mass graves. There were 16 Security Council resolutions against him. President Bush said, we cannot let this threat materialize. And when we learned through our intelligence, which turned out not to be entirely correct, that he had reconstituted, or they believed he'd reconstituted his biological and chemical weapons and was perhaps as little as a year from a nuclear device, we thought we have to act. But nobody wants to go to war. What you want to do is to force him out by a kind of international pressure. We frankly didn't get enough international pressure, and we had to take him out by military force. And I'll tell you, Steve, I'm glad we did, because today we are talking about an Iranian nuclear program. Can you imagine if we were talking about an arms race between Saddam Hussein's Iraq and Ahmadinejad's Iran? And that would have been a very strong likelihood.
And again, right off the front pages of the paper today, you've got the IAEA report that's about to be released that apparently shows that Iran is either closer to or has the nuclear weapon capability just over the horizon. And yet it's the same kind of debate. Do you stop it before they move ahead? You've made it clear that we should do whatever it takes to stop them from getting nukes. Is the world community there? And do you think Israel will act on their own if we don't help?
Well, the very fact that we talk about an Israeli unilateral action says how serious this problem really is. Obviously, there would be unintended consequences from military action against Iran. But I have to say it's a little bit deja vu all over again. I was sitting there looking at the Russians and the Chinese say, well, let's not do anything that will back the Iranians into a corner. Well, you have to now back the Iranians into a corner, and you have to back them into the corner with as many options as you possibly can put on the table, including the fact that the president president should never take the military option off the table. I believe we've still got time with the Iranian program because, frankly, the program's had some difficulties, and we ought to be doing everything we can to make it really hard for them and ultimately to bring that regime down.
You know, there's a lot of talk of what happens if Israel launches a strike. And obviously they've got their facilities are moved around. They're more hardened. They've got things divided up where it makes it a little bit harder. But the Israelis took out the Syrian nuclear facility, and there was no backlash. There was no assault on Israel. Would this be different, or would we see the same thing after the strike is done?
I think we have to assume that this would be different because, first of all, I think it's well understood that a lot of things are around population centers like Tehran. So this would be pretty nasty.
They put it in a place that
puts people at risk. And by the way, terrorists do that. You know, they like to embed in apartment buildings. They like to have so-called human shields. Well, this is one large human shield in the fact that it's all that Tehran is at risk. It's also the case that some have worried, and a lot of my Iranian expert friends worry, that you might actually strengthen the regime. And the Iranians are very proud people, and that an attack on Iran could actually strengthen the regime with a population that it has currently lost. It right now has no legitimacy. So these are hard decisions. I know they're being considered and looked at inside the administration. They have to be doing that. But it's really a lesson to the international community. Get tough on Iran now, and maybe we can avoid military action.
Ahmadinejad, unlike Assad, has not threatened Israel in the direct way of, I want to wipe him off the map. And, oh, by the way, if I get a second nuke, I'm coming after the U.S. He's been much more vile in his rhetoric than Assad ever was.
Yes, he's been much more vile than Assad. And he's a little on the crazier side as well. So I think we really do have to worry about Iran. And Iran is also the poster child for state sponsorship of terrorism. They sponsor Hezbollah. They sponsor the really bad Hamas. They make trouble for us in Iraq. And one thing that we could do, and it's unfortunate that our forces are coming home from Iraq totally, because you could put a lot of pressure on the Iranians in Iraq where they try to operate in the south.
When you look at the presidential field on the Republican side, and you've said that whoever comes out of it, you're going to back because you're a good Republican. Is there somebody, I'm not going to ask you to endorse anybody because I know you're not going to fall into my trap, but is there anybody that you think, okay, these couple of folks seem to get foreign policy? Because it's not on the debate. 4 years ago it wasn't. I think we're paying a price for that. It wasn't a major focus. People are focused on jobs. This is a dangerous world, as you talked about. It's ratcheting up. Who on the Republican side seems to have a better foreign policy grasp maybe than some of the others?
Well, I think we're going to find that out. Look, we've tended to elect governors and senators, and there's a reason for that. These are people who play on a national stage. But, you know, business people shouldn't be ruled out. I think we're going to go through this primary. We're going to find out. But I would say to anyone who doesn't have much foreign policy knowledge or experience, this is the time to get it. I remember in 1999 and 2000, George W. Bush invited people down to the governor's mansion to talk to him about foreign policy. In 1999, George Shultz, the former Secretary of State, had a big seminar in his living room. We talked about foreign policy. You owe it to the American people to know the basics now. And then we can debate these issues. I think they will be debated. But Steve, I'll just say, I fully understand why the American people first and foremost want these folks to debate the economy. And ultimately, our strength in the international system, our ability to lead, comes right back to whether we do the internal repair at home, get our budget deficits under control, stop borrowing money, deal with our entitlements, and so on, K-12 education, immigration, because ultimately we won't lead if we're weak at home.
And part of those discussions in the living room with these candidates should include reading first No Higher Honor, Condoleezza Rice's new book that, again, I think details the complications of the international foreign policy arena. It's not just bumper sticker. It's not easy. Last question. A lot of folks are going to be talking and have done in the past Condi Rice VP. Would Condi Rice go back into another administration? You talk about Cheney and Rumsfeld and these guys. They went back in. You served at like the highest cabinet level you could get. Would you do it again? Would you do a do-over?
Well, no higher honor is named that way because I really do believe that there's no higher honor, but I've had it. And I was Secretary of State, which is the greatest job, particularly if you're a foreign policy person. And I'm really a policy person, not a politician.
NFL commissioner still the better job.
Roger Goodell's doing a pretty good job. From Northern California, his job doesn't look so good either.
You just want the NFL commissioner job so you can move into the big time of being SEC commissioner, though. That's the only thing that'd be higher than tougher.
Hey, touche. You've got a point.
Condi Rice, always good to visit with you, my friend. And the book is No Higher Honor. a memoir of my years in Washington. Strongly recommended. Again, it underlines how much more complicated the foreign policy arena is. A lot more than bumper stickers. We're back in a moment with more of the Steve Gill Show. Stick around.